So are there any stars that you should consider benching this week is the nature of it. And the question came from at Tornister3, who asked, 1 QB league, can Josh Allen be trusted despite his tough matchups against Cleveland and the Eagles? My other option is Jared Goff. So I wanted to answer this one. I feel like I've done like versions of this, over the last month or so. We've talked about these kind of things where I just keep reminding people, like, don't overthink these fantasy decisions. I know it feels so important, and all week long you're racking your brain. What should you do? But I think sometimes people end up getting too cute with this stuff. And I am definitely not playing Allen, or not sitting Allen to play Goff. Does that mean out of 100 tries, does Allen outscore Goff every single time? No, definitely not. This is a probabilities game, right? So I'm looking at this as this guy is the number one fantasy quarterback on the season. The next closest quarterback is Matthew Stafford, who is almost 3 points behind him on a per game basis. You're not going to sit that guy. Josh Allen has shown time in, time out in bad weather situations, in bad matchups, he can come through for you, right? And the Browns are not like infallible. Like Caleb Williams last week had a couple touchdowns against them. We've seen other top quarterbacks this year, Drake May, Lamar Jackson. They've had big games against Cleveland this year. And we've seen Allen come through against tough opponents like QB9 versus the Panthers, who are actually pretty good in terms of fantasy points allowed to quarterbacks. QB3 versus the Chiefs, who are also a tough matchup. The only spot that he didn't come through was the Texans recently. That Texans defense is so tough, and they had his number, and no disrespect to Myles Garrett, but this Browns defense is not the Texans defense. So I'm not sitting Allen. He is still the number one quarterback for me this week, but I do think there's some other players who are, stars at their positions who you might want to think about sitting this week. One for me is Dak Prescott. He's going against the Chargers. He's a quarterback that is prone to having some down games once in a while. And the Chargers defense is another one of these defenses that is kind of scary to me. They've held 7 straight quarterbacks under 17 fantasy points. 4 of those 7 were held under 10 fantasy points. So definitely this is a dangerous game for Dak. I look at him as more of a low-end QB1 here, and a guy that could disappoint, could really let you down, like he sometimes lets the Cowboys down late in the season and we get to the playoffs. But I only said that to bother producer Colin. Another guy, Jalen Waddle versus the Bengals. We know this one, right? Like, I think you guys talked about this on yesterday's show, went over all these players for the Dolphins, but Waddle hasn't topped 55 yards in 4 straight games. Now he's got Quinn Ewers under center. Do we really feel like it's going to turn around and this is going to be a spot where he blows up? Plus, DJ Turner, we know he can create problems for opposing number one wideouts. So I see Waddle as more of like a low-end wide receiver too, if that, in this game. I worry about him. I think if you have players in that range, which people certainly could based on, the drafts this summer, trades throughout the season, I think you might want to consider sitting Waddle this week. Derrick Henry versus the Patriots. Patriots are allowing the 4th fewest fantasy points to running backs this season. Henry's given up more work too, right? Keaton Mitchell, Rasheen Ali, we've seen these guys get involved. I think Henry is still good. I don't think he's quite as agile maybe as he used to be. I think he's still pretty quick. Like if he gets that head of steam going, he's still pretty quick. But in terms of like plays that are like longer to develop, he just doesn't quite look the same. I said this for a little while, right? Like he's still a decent fantasy back, but when you get into these tougher matchups, I worry that we just don't have the same ceiling for Henry in fantasy. I think that's the case here. This is a tougher opponent. So I see him more as like a risky RB2 rather than that like top 10, top 12 option that he often is ranked as. And then the other one for me would be Brock Bowers, who I mentioned. The matchup with the Texans is tough. He's just not really that elite fantasy option anymore, right? And he often still produces, still gives you okay stats. I know it wasn't a great one last week because he was going against the Eagles, who are tough against tight ends. Well, guess who else is tough against tight ends? The Houston Texans defense, right? And we could just see this Raiders offense get completely shut down here. So I worry about Bowers. Doesn't mean I'm putting him down in like the tight end 2 range, but moves him down into like that mid-range tight end 1 area and makes you a lot more concerned about having him in your lineup where you drafted him to be that piece that was going to get you over the top. And he is just not that guy right now.
Okay, so let's pull on some of these threads here. Obviously, Josh Allen, we don't even need to discuss. I think Derrick Henry probably can't really bench Derrick Henry, but I do think he might be more of like a volatile running back too. But Do you necessarily have two better options? I don't know about that. Jalen Waddle, I agree with you. I mean, talked about it yesterday with Nate that's the trend against Cincinnati. Your running backs, especially running back pass catchers, and your tight ends are going to thump the Bengals, and your wide receiver one is going to get not blanked all the time, but they're definitely going to have a slow outing. How is that not going to happen here against this team with Quinn Ewers now under center? I feel like it's going to be a lot of Achane. It's going to be a lot of Darren Waller, and maybe you're hoping on like a big play happens for Jalen Waddle. So he's still somebody that I'm going to have as a top 20 option probably, but like towards that low end of the top 20. So definitely a guy that you could actually bench here. Brock Bowers, you got to have a really good tight end to be like really considering Brock Bowers, benching him. I think maybe a Harold Fannin type or a Kyle Pitts, if you somehow like pick those guys up off the waiver wire. That's the funny thing about people dunking on, like, I think that might even be too much.
He's in the same ballpark, I think, this week. He's in the same ballpark to me. I'm still probably going to have Bowers higher, but it's close.
It's definitely close. And yeah, like you said, if we ran the sim 100 times, does Colston Loveland outscore Brock Bowers on some of those? Definitely. Maybe even it's close to like 60-40. He doesn't versus does outscore him. I would say that the only, I don't know. One just quick note with the Texans defense, again, looking at the schedule adjusted fantasy points, they're second versus quarterback, sixth versus running backs, second versus wide receivers, and 12th versus tight ends. And you kind of see this with defenses like the Chargers, like the Seahawks, like the Texans, like the Broncos even. The Vikings are this way too, that they're worst against the tight ends relatively now. And because some of that's like, we'll just concede those throws. I mean, it's not crazy production or anything, but it's just sometimes you see that with the best defenses that, they're trying to take away the explosives on the outside. So they'll give you some tight end stuff. Now, Brock Bowers is a different deal than most tight ends. I'm sure the Texans will have a plan for Brock Bowers, but just wanted to make a note of that. The one guy I actually really want to pull the thread on here is Dak Prescott, because not only would I be nervous if I was a Dak Prescott manager, like how concerned are you if you have George Pickens or, CeeDee Lamb, I think can still eat regardless. He actually matches up well against the secondary, but like George Pickens, talked about this yesterday with Nate, is in a difficult spot for the way he particularly wins against this very zone heavy defense, where that's kind of what happened to him last week. The Vikings just bracketed, zoned up his side of the field, and Dak just never went that way because he's playing behind an offensive line that's dealing with injuries right now. So like, where are we at with the George Pickens and some of these guys in the passing game for Dallas as well?
I almost put Pickens in this section, to be honest, but I figured I probably shouldn't talk about two Cowboys players if we were going to focus on like four guys. But if I would have had a fifth, it would have been Pickens here. And it's for the reasons that you just mentioned. And I love Pickens, and I say this with love, but we've also seen that sometimes when he gets into games where things aren't really going his way, we know how he can kind of turn into that player who's not maybe putting in the same amount of effort late in the game in the second half sort of thing. So I worry about all of that here with him. He is still a volatile fantasy asset, even though he's had a great season. And yes, in this matchup, which is very, very difficult against this Chargers defense, who particularly are tough on the outside. Yeah, I think he's somebody that still is kind of like borderline, low end wide receiver 1, high end wide receiver 2. But again, how far can you push him down without seeming absolutely insane, right? In terms of the rankings, like there's people that do, and good for them, but sometimes you look at the ranking that it's just kind of crazy. I don't know how far you can push him down without seeming insane. And yet, yes, I have all the worries in the world about him and this entire passing attack. And you're not sitting CeeDee Lamb, but Pickens certainly you question. And Ferguson, I already mentioned, I have him way down in that mid-range tight end 2 area. And that's because I think that there's a good chance that Dak struggles in this game. And because of that, we just don't see the same kind of fantasy numbers from this offense that we normally do.
God, I feel like I've talked about that game every episode this week, the Chargers and the Cowboys. And I still have such a bad feel about how that one's going to go on both sides of the ball. So it's definitely a tricky one to project, some tough lineup decisions for sure. But yeah, again, kind of in conclusion here, I really feel like of the players we mentioned, the two guys that you could verifiably consider benching, to me at least, would be Dak Prescott and Jalen Waddle. The other guys, I think just relative to other guys in their position, you're probably not benching them.
Yeah, and I will say, like, because this is a factor too, that I don't know that Vegas totally agrees with my take here that this could be a potentially a lower scoring game, because 49.5 is the projected point total on that one, and it's a close game. So they think both these teams are going to be able to put up some points. I have my questions about this Cowboys passing attack, but it doesn't seem like Vegas is that worried about it.
That's what I'm saying. Can't get a good feel on how it's going to go. So we'll see what happens when the games actually take place.